Long before the pyramids, the invention of writing, or the foundation of cities, a group of humans set foot on a small chain of islands in the Bay of Bengal. For over 26,000 years, their descendants have lived there, speaking languages no outsider fully understands. In the heart of these islands lies a place unlike any other, a place where outsiders are forbidden and ancient ways of life remain untouched, North Sentinel Island. Almost nothing is known about the people who live there. They show no signs of using fire or agriculture, and they kill anyone who dares to set foot on the island. But this island is only one part of a much bigger story, the story of the Andamanese peoples, among humanity's oldest and most mysterious communities. The Andamanese people represent some of the world's most isolated hunter-gatherer communities. They are traditionally grouped into the Great Andamanese, Onge, Jarawa, Sentinelese, and Jangil peoples. Today, the Andaman Islands archipelago, where the Andamanese people live, is part of India, although the islands are more than 1,000 kilometers away from the Indian subcontinent. The ancestors of these people are believed to have arrived in Southeast Asia more than 50,000 years ago from Africa, following the southern coastal route. They stayed in this region for around 24,000 years. It is assumed that during the last ice age, around 26,000 years ago, a small group, the ancestors of the Andamanese, broke off from the larger population and moved southward to the Andaman Islands, helped by lower sea levels that made migration easier. They settled a few of these islands and lived as hunter-gatherers in complete isolation from the rest of the world. Over time, the Andamanese diversified into the 5 distinct tribes we've just mentioned. Thousands of years passed, and until 1789, when the British Empire built a penal colony on the Andaman Islands, these mysterious inhabitants were largely forgotten by the rest of the world. The Andamanese people share deep ancestry with Southeast Asian populations. However, due to the thousands of years of isolation, they developed a very distinct appearance, quite different from the people of India, Myanmar, Thailand, and other nearby regions. After India gained independence in 1947, the government began to officially recognize the Andamanese tribes as scheduled tribes and even as particularly vulnerable tribal groups. This designation ensures that they're protected by Indian law. Each tribe was relocated to small reserves. The Great Andamanese were moved to Strait Island, the Jarawa to the Jarawa Reserve, the Onge to Little Andaman, and the Sentinelese were legally restricted to North Sentinel Island. The Indian government tightly controls access to these areas, requiring permits to visit regions near the tribes. North Sentinel Island is entirely off limits to outsiders. Although linguists classify the languages spoken by the Andamanese people under the Andamanese language family, practically nothing is known about them. The proposed Andamanese language family has 2 branches, Great Andamanese and Ongan. The first branch was spoken by the Great Andamanese people and includes 10 dialects, each named after the tribe that spoke it. The Ongan branch includes the Onge and Jarawa languages. The Jangil language remains unattested and unclassified, as the Jangil tribe was never well studied and became extinct in the early 1900s. Although the Sentinelese language is still spoken, due to lack of contact, practically nothing is known about it. It remains a complete mystery. Once the largest Andamanese group, the Great Andamanese originally consisted of 10 distinct tribes. Although today they inhabit a tiny fraction of Great Andaman Island, this is how their homeland looked in the 19th century. We see the 10 tribes: Bo, Kari, Kora, Jeru, Kede, Kol, Juvoi, Pujikvar, Bale, and Bea, most of which became extinct in the early 1900s. Culturally, the Great Andamanese were hunter-gatherers like the other tribes, but being more numerous, they had larger settlements. They built huts of wood and palm thatch, fished and hunted, and used canoes to travel between islands. Each tribe spoke a dialect named after them, though some scholars categorize these dialects as separate languages, as they might not have been very mutually intelligible. Almost all Great Andamanese dialects were named by adding the prefix aka before the tribe name. Aka means language or tongue in the Great Andamanese dialects, so for example Akabo translates to Bo tribe language. The Great Andamanese were the first among the 5 tribes to have had contact with the outside world. In 1789, the British set foot on the southeast coast of Great Andaman Island and established a naval base and penal colony, naming it Port Blair. The initial exchange between the tribes and the British was not friendly at all. There was much resistance and many skirmishes between the two peoples. In 1796, just 7 years after the foundation of the colony, the British seized all operations and left the island due to recurring attacks by the natives, an unprecedented number of deaths, and logistical issues. This period marked the beginning of hundreds of years of catastrophe for the Great Andamanese. Presumably, before outside contact, their population was between 5,000 to 6,000 in the 1700s. However, against the diseases the British brought, such as smallpox, measles, and syphilis, the Great Andamanese had no immunity. As a result, their population was decimated. In the 1800s, the British estimated that the Andamanese population had decreased by 50%, bringing it down to around 3,000. There were reports by British officers describing whole villages lying silent, wiped out by illness. In 1901, around 600 Great Andamanese were reported. This number fell to just 19 in the 1960s. From around 5,000 in the 1700s, their population had dropped to 19 in less than 200 years. Although the British had abandoned the island after an unsuccessful 7-year-long presence, they returned in the mid-1800s. Following the 1857 Indian Rebellion, the British established a new penal colony on the island. Thousands of jailed rebels were brought to Great Andaman Island. In 1858, a group of Indian convicts escaped and disappeared into the woods. They were all hunted down one by one by the Great Andamanese. However, for some reason, one convict named Dudnat Tidari was spared and surprisingly accepted to live with the Great Andamanese. After living with the tribe for a year, Dudnat even married an Andamanese woman. One day, he found out that the Great Andamanese were planning a large-scale surprise attack on the British. Dudnat was at a crossroads. Either he was to stay and fight with the tribe or rejoin the British side. He chose the latter, and in 1859, in the Battle of Aberdeen, the British, expecting the attack, crushed the Great Andamanese. This was the turning point in history that irreversibly destroyed the fighting force of the tribes. The remaining tribes retreated into the forest and continued living in isolation. Following the war, many Indians and their families were settled on the Great Andaman Islands by the British. The new settlers cleared forests and damaged the habitat, aiming to create new residential areas for themselves. In the 1860s, the British set up a place called the Andaman Home. The house captured Great Andamanese people and civilized them. Conditions there were harsh. Many died from illness and mistreatment. Tragically, not a single one of the 150 babies born in the Andaman Home lived past the age of 2. After 1947, more families from mainland India settled on Great Andaman Island, particularly on the east coast. As more land was cleared to make space for the newcomers, the areas inhabited by the Andamanese shrank rapidly. Today, the remaining 50 or so Great Andamanese live on Strait Island, which is a tiny fraction of their original homeland. As they became increasingly dependent on the food and medical aid provided by the Indian government, the Great Andamanese are now almost fully assimilated. Only a few elders speak their ancestral languages. Hindi has become more prevalent among the younger members of the community. Among the 10 Great Andamanese dialects, Akajeru is the last surviving one, with around 5 speakers, none of whom speak it fluently. The last native Akajeru speaker, a man named Nao, died in 2009. A year later, in 2010, the Akabo dialect became extinct with the death of his last speaker, a woman named Boa Senior, who passed away at the age of 85. She had witnessed epidemics, the Japanese invasion of the island during World War II, and the Indian Ocean earthquake and tsunami in 2004. What a life, she must have had such interesting stories. The most recent Great Andamanese language to become extinct is Akakari. In 2020, its last speaker, an elder woman named Licho, passed away. This language is now part of history. Unfortunately, much of the traditional life of the Great Andamanese has been lost. Today, they are the most endangered of all Andamanese peoples. Although their population is increasing slowly, their last remaining ancestral language is on the verge of extinction.
क्या बोला?
बोलेगा हमको हम जब जाने टाइम क्या खा रहे हैं बोले देखो एक बाप मामा इतना है कोई जीते अपना बूढ़ो मत पकड़ के रखे
The Jaravas are the most numerous Andamanese tribe today, with a population of around 380. Historically, they have lived in the deep forest of the southeastern section of Great Andaman Island. Known for their hostility towards outsiders, the Jaravas didn't actively resist the British presence but preferred to retreat deep into the forest, remaining in complete isolation until 1997. As a result, although some Jaravas were affected by diseases brought by outsiders, their population did not experience the same catastrophic collapse as the Great Andamanese. They were largely spared from major outbreaks. The Jaravas organized many raids on British outposts, but the British were never able to subjugate this tribe. The dense forests where the Jaravas lived served as a natural defense that the British could never cross. The Jaravas have long had a reputation as fierce warriors who killed most intruders attempting to set foot on their homelands. Like all the Andamanese peoples, they follow the hunter-gatherer lifestyle, hunting wild pigs, lizards and fish, and gathering edible plants. They traditionally wore little clothing, decorated their bodies with paint and ornaments, and lived as nomadic groups in temporary huts made from palm leaves. The Jarawa people speak their own ancestral language, which belongs to the Onge branch of the Andamanese language family. Today, they are almost entirely monolingual, making Jarawa the most well-preserved and well-studied Andamanese language. It is recorded to have 13 vowels and 28 consonants. Like all Andamanese languages, it is a spoken-only language passed down orally through generations. Over time, as the Great Andamanese population declined, the Jarawas spread across large areas of the island's west coast, occupying lands that were once home to the Great Andamanese. Their homeland in the 1700s looked like this, and today it looks like this. During World War II, the Andaman Islands were occupied by Japan. There are reports of skirmishes between the Andamanese tribes and Japanese forces, resulting in several casualties among the Jarawas and the Great Andamanese. However, the details are scarce and not well documented. The 1970s were a turning point. Following the arrival of many Indian settlers from the mainland, plans were made to connect the north and south ends of the island with a highway. This led to the construction of the Andaman Trunk Road, a road that passed directly through Jarawa territory, threatening their isolation. Reports emerged of Jarawas attacking construction workers in defense of their homeland. Despite this, the road was completed and remains operational today. In 1997, something remarkable happened. After thousands of years of avoiding contact, the Jarawas began coming out of the forest and voluntarily interacting with Indian settlers. No one knows for sure why they chose to make contact. The most widely accepted theory links it to an event in 1996. According to the story, a 15-year-old Jarawa boy named Enmai broke his leg while fleeing after trying to steal a jackfruit from a local garden. Though initially wary and refusing help, he eventually accepted food and was taken to a hospital. After being treated kindly and fed fish, Enmai warmed up to the staff during his 5-month stay. When he returned to his community, he shared his experience, which may have inspired the Jarawa to become more open. This new openness unfortunately led to a measles outbreak among the tribe, but Indian officials responded with medical assistance. In later cases, Indian doctors treated Jarawa infants with various health issues. One heartwarming photo shows an Indian doctor holding a Jarawa baby, and I must say this baby is extremely cute. This leads us to a key figure in their modern history, Dr. Ratan Chandrakar. Known locally as the Jarawa Doctor, he served in the Andaman Islands from 1998 to 2022 and cared for many Jarawas. He recalls, "On my first day at work, I had Jarawas pointing arrows at me as our boat approached their island. We had taken coconuts and bananas and offered these to the children on the beach, which somewhat broke the ice. Their population was 255 when I took over, and it's now 612. Their infant mortality rate was very high as they were prone to pneumonia. Once a mother brought her sick baby to me, and the baby was cured after an injection. The news spread like wildfire, and thereafter began queues of mothers and children at our centers." Dr. Carr not only treated them but learned their language and culture. His first-hand accounts are among the most valuable sources on Jarawa customs. He describes one tragic moment. The Jarawas believe in some higher force and that heaven is cold. They celebrate births and mourn deaths. Once, a 15-year-old boy, Ohame, fell from a tree while lowering a beehive. He was badly hurt and he didn't survive. When I broke the news to his mother, she started hitting her head on a rock until it was bloodied. 4 other women tried to control her, but couldn't. My staff thought they would kill us in anger, but they understood that we had tried. The boy's body was kept on a distant island, and after 3 months, his father went back and retrieved some bones. It is their custom to wear these bones as necklaces or bracelets in loving memory of the departed. Outsiders would see this from ships with binoculars and assume that the Jarawas were cannibals. I once asked the Jarawa leader if they were cannibals, and he laughed his head off. In recent decades, however, the Andaman Trunk Road has also been misused. Many tour companies have run so-called human safaris, busing tourists through Jarawa territory to view and interact with the tribe. Although the Indian Supreme Court ordered the closure of the road in 2002, it remains open. Today, permits are required and vehicles must be escorted by police to reduce interaction. Signs along the road now state clearly, do not take photos or videos of the Jarawas, do not give them food, do not stop your vehicle, do not touch or interact with the Jarawas. But many people ignore these. Videos exist online showing tourists giving food to Jarawas, even bribing police to stop and interact. A 2012 video caused global outrage when tourists made Jarawa people dance in exchange for food. So yes, there have been positive developments, but also sickening ones. You know how it is. Tell someone don't push the button, and someone will always push it. Thankfully, many local and international organizations now protest these safaris, distributing leaflets to raise awareness and discourage unethical tourism. The future of the Jarawas is uncertain. While some efforts aim to preserve their heritage, threats from tourism and poachers remain. Yet to this day, they stand as one of history's most fascinating communities, with one foot in the Stone Age and one foot touching the modern world. We call them uncivilized, but there's so much to learn from them. They know how to read nature, and not one Jarawa life was lost to the 2004 tsunami. Inhabiting 2 small patches of Little Andaman Island, the Onge people are often regarded as the friendliest Andaman tribe. Before the arrival of the British, they were the sole inhabitants of the island. Their homeland once looked like this, and today it looks like this. Because of their friendly interactions with outsiders, the Onges were severely affected by diseases. In the early 1900s, their population was around 600. Today, fewer than 120 Onges remain. Like all Andamanese peoples, the Onges traditionally lived as hunter-gatherers. However, in recent years, they have also begun practicing basic agriculture. Culturally, they are known for their peaceful nature and deep understanding of the rainforest and the sea. They continue to speak the Onge language and maintain many traditional practices, but their future remains uncertain due to the small size of their community. A tragic incident in 2008 caused severe damage to the tribe. More than 20 Onges were hospitalized after drinking methanol, mistaking it for alcohol. 8 people died, which accounted for nearly 9% of their entire population. As you can imagine, such a loss can be catastrophic for a community this small. The Onge language belongs to the Ongan branch along with Jarawa. Today, among the 120 or so Onges, 94 are recorded as speakers of their ancestral tongue. Around 30 individuals have assimilated into Indian society and either no longer speak the language or have only limited fluency. Although Onge and Jarawa are in the same language family, they are not mutually intelligible, which suggests that these 2 communities split from one another a very long time ago. The structure of Onge grammar is quite different from Indo-European languages. It relies on suffixes or word endings to indicate possession and tense. The language does not use articles like the or a, and its verbs typically come at the end of a sentence. Onge has a full set of personal pronouns like I, you, and he, she, and it clearly distinguishes between singular and plural. One particularly interesting feature is its limited counting system. It only has specific words for 1 and 2. Anything beyond that is simply called kelan, meaning many. Instead of using left and right for directions, the Onge refer to their natural surroundings. The word mor means toward the sea and is used instead of left, while bo means toward the forest, replacing right. For example, the sentence in mor pekere translates as I walk towards the sea, which functions the same thing as saying I go left. Today, most Onge still follow the lifestyle their ancestors practiced for centuries. However, their dependence on the outside world has increased. They now receive regular medical and food aid from the Indian government. Modern items like pots and pans are commonly used, and many Onges can be seen wearing jeans and t-shirts. Still, compared to the Great Andamanese, Onge culture remains much more intact. Well, the Jangils will have the shortest section in this video because we barely know anything about them. The Jangil were a small tribe who once lived in the forested interior of the Rutland Island. Very little is known about their population, but the rugged terrain of Rutland Island could likely support only a small nomadic band of hunter-gatherers. This is the only known photograph that confirms the existence of the Jangil. Taken in the 1890s by Maurice Portman, a British colonial administrator of the Andaman Islands, the blurry image shows 2 Jangil huts and a few members of the tribe. When the British arrived in the Andaman Islands in the late 1700s, there were only a few brief encounters with the Jangil, who largely avoided outside contact. In 1884, a British-led expedition to Rutland Island captured a Jangil man who identified himself as Habia. He noted that his language was different from that spoken by the Jarawa. Habia fell ill shortly after his capture and was returned to Rutland Island. He was never seen again. The Jangil people and their language were never thoroughly studied, and much about them remains a mystery. Although their language is undocumented, it is sometimes classified under the Ongan branch due to the tribe's geographic proximity to the Jarawa and the Onge peoples. According to British colonial records, the last known sighting of a Jangil occurred in 1907, and the tribe was officially declared extinct by 1920. Their disappearance is believed to have been caused by diseases introduced through contact with outsiders. When colonial officers visited Rutland Island in the 1920s, they reported finding abandoned villages and crumbling huts, but no trace of the Jangil. No clear photographs of individual Jangil people are known to exist. Most of what we know about the tribe, their language, and their way of life comes from the notes of Maurice Portman. Their silence in the historical record is haunting. A people who once lived vanished with little trace and left behind more questions than answers. And now we come to the world-famous Sentinelese. Ironically, while they are the most well-known of all the Andamanese peoples, they also remain the least understood. To this day, we know virtually nothing about their language, culture, customs, or even their exact population. The Sentinelese are often described as the most isolated people on Earth. They inhabit North Sentinel Island, a small forested inland just southwest of Great Andaman. For generations, they've made it clear that they want no contact with the outside world, responding to any intruders with a rain of arrows, killing many. Unlike the rest of the Andaman Islands, the North Sentinel was never colonized. Neither the British nor anyone else ever managed to set foot there successfully. That fierce independence has kept the Sentinelese free from outside influence to this day. Today, one does not simply visit North Sentinel Island. It is strictly prohibited. To both protect the tribe and outsiders, the Indian government banned all travel to the island back in 1956 and established a 5 nautical mile exclusion zone around it. Although violating this law sends you directly to prison, there have still been some reckless outsiders who attempted to set foot on the island, but we will come to this in a bit. What little we do know about the Sentinelese comes from distant observations and brief encounters, pretty much all of which have been quite hostile. It was reported that the Sentinelese live in small groups as hunter-gatherers, using bows, wooden spears, and simple dugout canoes, similar in material culture to their neighbors, the Jarawa and Onge. They build huts, fish in shallow waters, hunt, and gather fruit from the forest. Their clothing and adornments are modest and traditional. Both men and women typically wear simple skirts or belts made from bark or plant fibers, occasionally complemented by bands worn around the head or neck. Culturally, they're probably similar to other Andamanese tribes, but no one really knows for sure. Their language has never been recorded, and their way of life remains a mystery. In today's hyper-connected world, North Sentinel Island is one of the last truly untouched places on the planet, home to a people still living as they have for centuries, entirely on their own terms. Now, let's see a timeline of the brief encounters and attempts to establish contact between the outside world and the Sentinelese. The first known mention of North Sentinel Island by an outsider dates back to 1771, when British surveyor John Ritchie recorded it during a voyage on an East India Company ship. As they passed the island that night, Ritchie noticed a multitude of lights, hinting that the island was inhabited. Still, he didn't go ashore and no contact was made. In 1867, an Indian trade ship ran aground on North Sentinel Island. The crew and passengers were attacked by the Sentinelese. A few days after, they were rescued by the British Royal Navy. This event was the first recorded encounter between the Sentinelese and outsiders. In 1880, British colonial officer and administrator of the Andaman Islands, Morris Whittle Portman, led an expedition to North Sentinel Island. Upon seeing a large party arriving, the Sentinelese retreated into deep forested interior of the island. The expedition team found abundant signs of habitation and stumbled upon several abandoned villages, pathways, and artifacts. After exploring the island for a few days, Portman's party found 2 elders and 4 children and took them to Port Blair. The elders died shortly after their capture, most probably due to diseases they contracted. The children began feeling sick as well. Portman sent the children back to the island with some gifts. They might have spread disease to the other Sentinelese people. In 1896, a convict escaped from the penal settlement on Great Andaman Island. Well, he might have thought that he had finally reached freedom, but by making the worst mistake, he landed on North Sentinel Island with his raft. The search party discovered his lifeless body a few days later on a beach. He was shot with arrows multiple times, and his throat was sliced. For the following decades, there were several more Europeans who set foot on the island in attempts to establish contact with the Sentinelese, but they never managed to find anyone as the Sentinelese retreated inland. And we fast forward to 1967. Aiming to understand the Sentinelese more and build friendly relations, Indian anthropologists started organizing scientific expeditions to North Sentinel Island. Although they were still unable to establish contact with the avoidant Sentinelese, they found Sentinelese villages and gathered significant information about their lives. Most of these expeditions left abundant gifts to the inhabitants of the island before they returned to the mainland. However, it was noted that, compared to the past, the Sentinelese had become slightly more accepting of outsiders. In 1974, a National Geographic film crew approached the island to gather footage for a documentary they were filming about the Andamanese people. This event gave us the very first footage of the Sentinelese people in history. However, the crew director was shot by an arrow, making it evident that the Sentinelese were still not okay with outsiders coming too close. In 1981, a cargo ship ran aground on the northeast reef of the island. The captain of the ship dispatched a distress call to notify the nearby authorities. Wild men, estimate more than 50, carrying various homemade weapons, are making 2 or 3 wooden boats. Worrying they will board us at sunset. All crew members' lives not guaranteed. Luckily, the high tide and strong waves prevented the Sentinelese from approaching the ship, and about a week later, the ship's crew was rescued by helicopter. The wreck of this cargo ship still remains visible on the island. You yourself can go to any online map and see it. This wreck started the Iron Age on North Sentinel Island. The Sentinelese salvaged iron from the ship and used it to create spearheads and arrow tips. A decade later, in 1991, the seemingly impossible happened. A group of Indian anthropologists managed to establish friendly contact with the Sentinelese, which gave us this fascinating footage. Gifts were exchanged and there was violence-free physical contact, except for the moment when a coconut accidentally landed on a Sentinelese man. Following this historical interaction, there were several other expeditions to the island by anthropologists, which mainly aimed to leave gifts and coconuts for the Sentinelese. In 1997, the Indian government decided to end all expeditions to respect the islanders' isolation. But of course, our timeline doesn't end here. In 2004, the devastating earthquake and tsunami in the Indian Ocean also affected North Sentinel Island. A helicopter was sent to observe the damage and check on the well-being of the Sentinelese. The Sentinelese responded to the helicopter with a rain of arrows, telling we're fine in their own way. In 2006, 2 Indian fishermen were illegally harvesting crabs within the island's buffer zone. Overnight, as they were sleeping on the boat, the anchor failed and the boat drifted to the island. The fishermen were killed by the Sentinelese. The helicopter sent to retrieve their bodies was attacked by arrows and the mission was hastily abandoned. The Sentinelese were photographed sitting on the boat while the bodies of the fishermen were not seen and never recovered. Perhaps the most infamous and widely known incident on this island happened in 2018. In short, American missionary John Allen Chau illegally visited the island several times over the course of a few days, attempting to convert the Sentinelese to Christianity. He had supposedly paid some local fishermen to take him there. During one of his visits, it was claimed that he invited the Sentinelese to recognize Jesus and sang songs of worship to them. Subsequently, a young Sentinelese boy fired an arrow at him, which pierced the Bible John was holding against his chest. On his final visit on 17 November 2018, John was killed. Later, during police investigations, the fishermen who took John there said they saw the Sentinelese dragging his body into the forest. His remains were never retrieved. The latest incident occurred in 2025, in which an American tourist illegally solo traveled to North Sentinel Island on a kayak. He reportedly set foot on the island for about 5 minutes and left a Diet Coke and a coconut on the shore. Soon after he left the island, he was detained by the Indian Coast Guard. Why are people like this? Well, my friends, we have come to the end of another video of exploring the unique parts, languages, and peoples of our planet. I hope you enjoyed this content. Thanks for watching, and I will see you soon.